You're listening to the More Than a Worship Leader podcast. Here's your host, Gary Durbin.
Welcome to the More Than a Worship Leader podcast, where we talk about worship ministry in the local church. Today with me is Andrea Olson. She is a passionate worship leader, songwriter, and worship leading coach based in Minnesota. In 2014, she began a ministry for worship leaders called Overflow and has hosted 9 conferences and more than 3,000 worshipers from across the country. So, Andrea, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back, Gary. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, I say welcome back because you were on the podcast last year. So I encourage our listeners to go check that out if you haven't heard that episode. And I was on your podcast too, so that was fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. That was a really fun thing that we just could continue the conversation between our different podcasts.
hmm And you are in Minnesota. We were talking a little bit beforehand, but we were talking about the difference between, our cold here in Ohio has been 7 below and everybody's been dying. But you
Yes.
guys have what? What's the coldest?
I mean, a couple of weeks ago, it was like 30 below. So we nearly canceled school and we just stayed home. I was like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, we don't need any more food. Like, we're just going to deal with what we have. I'm
Yeah.
not leaving.
So my wife and I traveled to Dallas, Texas a couple weeks ago, and we happened to fly in the night and the moment of the coldest weather. So we flew in at like 11 p.m. I left my car at the airport over the weekend. And so we had to strategize about how we're going to do this. So I'm like, okay, you go get the bag off the carousel. I'm going to go to the garage and I'm going to warm up the car.
Yes.
Don't come out until I text you that it's safe to come out.
Yeah. We
So,
need like 20 minutes for the engine to like
yeah.
recover and warm up. Oh man,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
glad you survived.
Yeah, we survived. So, how is everything going with Overflow Worship? What's been going on with that these days?
Yeah, Overflow Worship has been undergoing a lot of change and transition. It's interesting because, I started Overflow in 2014, and it really was just out of a passion for the local church and a passion for worship leaders and to just see them gather and be in community and grow together. And as it's changed over the years, I've found myself like holding on tightly and but saying that I'm not, right? Like, Lord, I'm open to anything, like take it where you want it. And then when change starts to happen, it's really hard not to resist that. And 2024 was a big year of change for Overflow. So I would say what's happening and what's going on now is I'm just as we got to the end of last year, I felt like, we need to pivot and we need to focus on just nurturing the people that we have, loving on the people that we have, and really meeting them where they're at. I think there was just um, a lot of a lot of transition, a lot of just, I don't know, the people that I was talking to in the church were just showing signs of exhaustion, right? And signs of weariness. And so I was like, okay, we are going to focus on worship, prayer, and spreading joy for the rest of 2024. And that's just what we're going to do. And as we began to do that, I really found this desire, but also this need to take that to the broader audience of the church as a whole. So it's not only that worship leaders need ministry and need attention and care. Yes, of course they do. And that's always a passion of mine for worship leaders, but also the church itself needs encouragement and support and people to come alongside of them and if people in the church to come alongside of them and say like, hey, I've been there, I'm with you, I'm for you, I'm praying for you. And so as Overflow Worship is growing and changing, we're wanting to um, to really showcase how like we can be a blessing to the church as a whole, not just the ministry leaders and the worship leaders. And so as we're kind of growing and changing, it's been interesting to see how God is opening up those doors for us to do that as well as ministering to the worship leaders.
What do you what have you found has been one of the big stressors for church leaders out there right now?
You know, I was I would say it's it's probably like a mix of the uncertain times, right? Like it doesn't matter what the topic is, you flip on the news, you open up your news app, whatever, there's always something. And people in general are looking for direction and guidance and like hope, right? Like, hey, are we going to be okay? Like, is everything going to be okay? And so there's a lot of additional pressure for church leaders to have those answers and it's like for young leaders, whether they're a pastor or a worship leader, they're like, I'm scared too, like I've never been through this. And so there's an expectation that, we help shepherd people through this, we guide them through this, but we're worried about it too, or we're scared about it too, not sure what to do. And so I think that's something that I've been seeing a lot is just an added pressure with the added external circumstances worldwide, and especially in the fall. It doesn't really matter what side of the spectrum you're on. The politics side was stressful, right? Like the
Mm,
world news is stressful. And and so I think that all of that compiled together has just added a lot of pressure for leaders that's been there, but it's heightened, if that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been a last 4 or 5 years. It's been just a lot of stress and pressure when it comes to polarization with issues and politics and COVID and just a lot of things to navigate through that churches we really weren't equipped for it. We it's almost like we just had to experience it to figure it out. So
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah, absolutely.
God is gracious and he's good and it's his church, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like it's at risk or anything. But
Yeah.
we are the people who are fighting the good fight, so we feel it
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I really do believe that the the church of tomorrow depends on the people of today, right?
Hmm.
And like not the not like you said, like God is in control, but like
Mhm.
the health and well-being and like the people that are in it or the reputation that it has, like is this a safe place to be?
Mm.
Well, that's on us to also culturally to say like, hey, yeah, like it's a safe place to be, it's a welcoming place, like we want to help you grow in your faith, and that's been increasingly difficult, as you said, with everything over the last 5 years. I actually listened to this podcast. I don't know, do you know who Carrie Newhoff is?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does this like church trends, 2025 podcast. He does one at the beginning of every year, and it was fascinating. He does all this research, so it's very, backed by a ton of reputable research, but just all the staggering statistics of church leaders saying like, "Hey, um, I there was like 5 or 10% of worship leader or pastors in general, leaders in general, who said that they felt like they had a community of support." And so,
Mm.
like, there's 90% that don't. And there was a high percentage that had contemplated not only quitting, but
Mm.
like suicide.
Mm.
And and so there's a massive need for something, like we've got to do something internally within the church so that externally we can continue to grow the body of Christ.
Yeah, I think even emotional and mental health
Hmm.
can be neglected for leaders. We definitely focus on our spiritual health, and
Hmm.
that's massively important. But we also have this concept of mental and emotional health that's, I think it's starting to get normalized more and more.
Yeah.
And even myself, like I'm going to see my counselor on this coming Wednesday. I every once in a while I'll just schedule an appointment just to go
Yeah.
in and see how I'm doing. And I'm grateful for my church that allows me to do that, that helps us with that. And so I think that might be something that churches probably should consider more and more to look after their staff and provide some help in that area.
Yeah, 100%. Getting that outside help, that outside perspective,
Mhm.
um, is is huge. I was actually chatting with a gal from India. We were at the same retreat. She's a worship leader in India, and she, over the last like 5 years, has gotten her counseling license. And it was just fascinating, to talk with her about all of these young female church leaders that she's meeting with that they don't have anywhere else to go to talk about this stuff because
Mm,
it's like within the church you feel like you shouldn't talk about the struggles you're having because you're supposed to be a leader,
right.
like be on the platform, but at the same time, human beings, like we're human beings, and so she's just been grateful to be able to be a space for that, but also was blown away by the fact that that wasn't happening. And so I think
Yeah.
you're so right. It needs to be normalized and it needs to be made available. And we need to encourage people to do that because it's huge.
Yeah. Worship leaders and church leaders are people. How about that?
Yep. Yeah. How
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So your ministry, Overflow Worship, it's for tons of worship leaders have been helped by it. One question I have for you today, I was just thinking about that word overflow. It's intriguing to me. So would you mind just going into how you came up with that name for your ministry, Overflow?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as a worship leader, I I started out, in a small church in leading every single Sunday. And, my husband was the youth pastor at the church, and he was also either running sound or playing bass, like whatever was needed. And he never did both. Thankfully, he didn't ever have to, like, hook up his bass back at the back at the
Yeah.
sound. Um, but it was a small church, small team, and I led every Sunday for many years and never had a Sunday off. And I found myself not not being not ever being refilled. And that was on me, obviously, right? I was running at a pace that I shouldn't have been running at and I was approaching burnout, but at the same time, I was a young leader. I was 21 years old and nobody was telling me, like none of the church staff was telling me like, "Hey, you should slow down," because they weren't either. Like nobody told them either. And this
Mhm.
is just what we do. We just run hard until we can't run anymore and then we die. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know about that. And so I I remember sitting with my husband one day, and he was just like, I can tell that you're tired. I can tell that you're exhausted. And I was like, yeah, I can't keep going at this pace. And he was like, are you spending time in the word? Are you spending time with the Lord? Like, are you making sure that you're getting that time in? I'm like, no, like I'm
Mhm.
not because I don't have time. I'm working full time and then I'm doing this volunteer worship leading thing. They're not even paying me, which is fine. Like they couldn't and I wanted to, but it was just too much. And so I found myself completely depleted and I knew something had to change. And so I went on a journey of realizing that I have to consistently refuel myself and refill in the word, in worship, in community. And I began to realize that the other worship leaders and the other pastors in my sphere were in the same boat and I wasn't alone, but we didn't know what to do about it. And so that's really where overflow came from because I believe that we need to lead from a place of overflow. When we're standing on that platform, we have to be filled up ourselves, having done the work in the secret place, because what we do in private is proven in public, right? And so we need to refill in the secret place to the place of overflowing so that we're giving from that overflow and we're not giving from a place of emptiness. And it's like that in any area of life, right? But specifically as it relates to worship and ministry leaders, we pour out week after week after week after week. And eventually, I mean, you can do it for a little bit. Like we're resilient people, but
Mhm.
eventually it's gonna run out. So that's where overflow came from.
Yeah. I am prone to burnout as well. And what I guess what I mean to say by that is I'm prone to work too much.
Hmm.
So I learned some kind of um, life hacks when it comes to not working too much. one of the
Mhm.
things that I told somebody is I just simply leave my computer cord at my office.
There you
So
go.
if I'm home and I'm working and the battery runs out, work's over. That's
Yeah.
just one simple thing like that has helped me. Is there anything that you have discovered in your personal life that it's like, man, I made that change or I made that adjustment to really avoid burnout or working too much?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love that one. I think it's a good accountability to set up for ourselves of like, well, battery died, so I'm done, and I love that. I think that's great. I would say um a couple of things. Um I would say the guardrails that I've set up are questions I ask myself, such as, in retrospect, looking back, when was the last time and then I fill in the blank. Okay, so when was the last time I sat down and played piano and worshiped just
Hmm.
'cause? And if I can't remember, then I know it's a problem, right? If I'm like, oh, I haven't done that at all. Well, I love doing that. But I also like nobody, okay, no human needs me to do that. And so I'm very much like, and God doesn't need me to do it either. I'm just saying, like, no one needs me to do that. So I'm like, well, it can wait. No, no, it shouldn't. And so those are the types of questions that I ask myself. I have kind of these checkpoints of like, okay, when was the last time I did X? And if I can't remember, then I know that it's a problem. So that's one thing that I've put in place. And another thing is just really having open conversation with my husband. And he's the one that I'm closest to and that I trust. And for people listening, maybe that's, if you're not married, it's a friend or whatever. But just having that open conversation and that honesty of like, hey, I need your help to make sure that I'm not, you know, walking down the road of burnout. Like my husband, he says, if you don't sing around the house, like you're cooking or, whatever, he's like, I notice it. I'm like, that's so interesting because my brain is always going 10,000 miles an hour. So I don't even realize it, but he does. And so those types of checkpoints I've just put in place. Those are a few things.
Nice. Well, recently, Overflow Worship put out a really fun video series, and I think you put it out during Christmas time, and it's a take on The Office. So,
Yeah.
if you're familiar with the show The Office, I'm assuming, Andrea, that you like The Office. Is that right?
I mean, it's funny. I do. I'm not one of those people that's like watched the whole series or anything
Oh,
like that.
okay.
Like my husband, he enjoys it.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's other people on my team that enjoy it, and I do too, but I'm not I haven't watched the series
Yeah.
from front to back, but I think my husband has.
Do you have a favorite character?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I kind of I would say I always like lean towards some of the main characters. I don't know. Who's your favorite character? That's a hard one for me.
Yeah, it kind of goes back and forth. I really like some of the lines that Creed has. But it's hard to beat Michael Scott.
I know.
So,
That's
yeah.
what I was gonna say. I feel like it's kind of hard to beat Michael Scott, and so that's probably what I would say, but
Right, right, right. So you guys did this video series, three-part
Mhm.
series called The Church, kind of a spoof on The Office. So, a few questions for you. First is like how did you film it and edit it? Because it's really professionally well done. How did you I'm assuming you hired somebody to do that?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying that. So we have an amazing in-house video production
Hmm.
lead. And so he does all of our video and audio. And he's actually had a lot of great experience. He was on a traveling food show for a few years. And so they would do, episodes that they release on YouTube and stuff like that. And he's had a lot of unique experience. And so we were able to lean on that. And, it was a lot of work to film. And it's
Yeah.
always one of those things where, you know, like you think in your mind, you know what you're walking into, and then you get into it and it's like, okay, this is a lot more involved just because of all the different camera angles, and you have to um even just like the conversations, you
Yeah.
have to run them a few times for each person so you can get like all the different angles and stuff like that. But yeah, we went to a few different locations locally around where we live in Minnesota. We used our home church. Actually, they were
Uh-huh.
gracious enough to let us come in and use their space. And then my husband owns a company, so we used one of his office spaces for like our church office. Um, and and then a local coffee shop. So
Yeah.
yeah, we had a lot of fun running around town and
Yeah. Well,
and
it
filming
was
it.
super well done, super funny, and relatable,
Mm.
from, if you're on a church staff or even volunteer at a church, there's things that you'll relate to. I think I probably my favorite interaction was the tech guy and all his
We
Mr.
love
Pessimism.
Carl.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was funny. So whose idea was it to do this? Like whose brainchild was this?
Yeah. It's funny because we were really wanting to do something different for the end of the year and do something to engage with people and encourage people and really wanted to be relatable. And so we had come up with a bunch of different ideas and we were chatting as a team. And, we've kind of thrown it around in the past of like, wouldn't it be funny to do like a spin off The Office? And, but it's always just been nonchalant and not really that serious and just kind of like, oh yeah, haha, whatever. Well, we were chatting about it and Tony, the guy who does our video, he was like, yeah, we could do this idea we just came up with. He's like, or we could just do a spoof of The Office, but make it Christmas. And I was like, it just something inside me was like, we have to do that. It was a very random conversation, very kind of unexpected idea as we were ideating. And we all just, as a team, felt like, yeah, this is right. This is the right time. I think we need to spread some joy
Hmm.
and make everybody smile. I mean, we had churches reach out to us and say, like, we watched this as a staff every week when it came out. Like, this was our like our little reprieve because it was during Christmas time and it felt really relatable. Of course, embellished and, exaggerated and that kind of thing, but also at the same time, not really.
Right.
Because everything in the script is based on real stuff that's happened. And so, none of it was like fully made up. So it's relatable.
Oh yeah. Well, that's fun, and I'm sure it's been a nice break. Comedy is
Mm,
one of those things, and levity is one of those things that it's just medicine. It's
yep.
even as we've talked about, it's been kind of a rough season, and for church leaders. So thanks for putting out a little levity for us and giving us a break from the seriousness, but also
Yeah.
something that's compelling and relatable. So appreciate you guys' passion and work in that project. That was so awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a lot of fun and a lot of fun to get out there on YouTube and put a different project out there for people to just sit back, put your feet up, smile a little bit.
Mhm.
Because sometimes I think we, like you said, we need to laugh and we also need to laugh at ourselves and laugh at
Mhm.
the things that we face and because there's relatability and encouragement in that as well.
Yeah. So as we close out this episode, is there a word of encouragement you have for us worship leaders today when we think about the idea that this has maybe been a tough season,
Mhm.
and just a word of encouragement to spur us on to lead out of overflow as opposed to just being empty?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I would say I would just encourage you to find space for rest because we cannot lead from a place of overflow if we do not find space for rest. And that can look a lot of different ways. It can look like going on a walk and it can look like taking a sabbatical. Like there's a wide range of what rest can look like. But I guarantee you, if you do not take the time for it now, your life and or your body will make you take the time for it later. And it's really important for us to refuel and get quiet. There's so much noise all over the place. There's so much noise around us from the news and the media and the people and social media, all the things. It's loud. And we just got to turn it off. And so I encourage you to turn things off, find place for rest, because are a part of something so big and so powerful. You are leading the next generation in worship. And you're inviting them to rise up and be a part of the next generation of the church. And I believe that the next generation of the church deserves an even better, even healthier, even stronger church than what we have. And so you're a part of something so big and so special. And you, as the worship leader, deserve to do that from a place of overflow. And that's what God wants for you. I don't believe that God wants for us to be depleted and exhausted and worn out and burnt out. I don't think that that's what he has for us at all. But we have to take the initiative and carve out the time for rest, carve out the time for quiet, the time to be in his word and in worship and in community with people. And I guarantee that you'll find yourself less overwhelmed and overflowing more than you ever thought was possible. So that's what I would encourage all the leaders out there today with.
Yeah, I've heard it said that the Sabbath, remembering the Sabbath, is probably the most broken commandment by a lot of church leaders and believers. And so, yeah, I love your word on that. The challenge to rest in private and then let that overflow into leadership and worship in public. I love that challenge. So I hear that, and that's a challenge for me as well. So thanks for that. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast, and thanks for all you do with Overflow Worship.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's an honor to be here and great to chat with you today, Gary. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Please add this to your podcast list, review it, and share it with others. And don't forget about Gary's books, More Than a Worship Leader and More Than a Band, available on Amazon today.